You're listening to the Evryman Podcast. This is episode 20. Episode 20. It's 20 more than zero. I'm pretty happy about that. We've been at this a handful of months now, and I like it. I feel like we're getting into a groove. Selfishly, I feel like doing this each week and talking to guys from all over the country, and in this case, this week, all over the world. It's making my life better. I love it. I love doing this. I want to give a quick shout out to our next event in the Berkshires in Massachusetts, the first weekend of December. It's an open source retreat. We're going to have 30 guys there, about 5 or 6 Everyman leaders, and we are going to dive right in. And if it is similar to the last couple retreats, it's going to be an incredibly enjoyable, powerful, and growing opportunity for every man that shows up. That's why we call it Everyman, because we want every man that comes, every man that joins, to find out who he is, where he's going, what he wants, and we want to create an environment and community that helps support him to get that and to be more. So check it out. Come go to our website, everyman.co, go to the retreat section, and there's a sign-up page, gives you all the info. It is a good time. So this week, podcast is being released. I'm going to be in the middle of a hunt. I'm going to be out in the mountains in Montana, and my wife is going to hit the go button and release this on the right time. So I'm going to make the intro a little shorter today. I don't have a ton to say, but I want to spend some time introducing you to Steve James. He is my guest on this episode, and I almost think you should go to his website before you hear anything that I say about him, but his website is guruviking.com. I love this dude. I think I have a burgeoning man crush on him. He is something of a unicorn. I don't know. I hate that I just said that, but he's a pretty unique guy. He grew up in Scotland, way north in Scotland, and has just a really wild story, like wild story. And we've connected on a couple really cool ways. He's done a lot of cold weather survival. He spent time in nature, specifically survival type scenarios. And he's an incredibly spiritual, and I would even say mystical guy, which again is a word that might just make your butt clench up and it might make you feel uncomfortable. But this guy's the real deal. And he works one-on-one with really, really highly successful individuals around the world. He travels. He teaches movement practices and meditation and spiritual practice of different sorts. He's a young guy. He's got a big, bright red beard, which makes me immediately love him. And in this episode, we get into all kinds of stuff. We start with his story, and he shares some of his experience and where he came from. And kind of like an international man of mystery with a lot of notches in his belt in a lot of ways. And I guess that's probably enough to say, but check his work out at guruviking.com, and I hope you enjoy it. We're just getting to, I just asked you to introduce yourself, so yeah. I'll step back and let you tell us who you are.
Okay. Yeah, given what you said about, the elevator pitch not being the direction to go, I probably ought to say a couple of lines about what I do professionally.
Please do.
Yeah. More or less, the ethos is to empower people to think and feel and make decisions for themselves. That's more or less what I do, and I do it in workshops and one-on-one with one-on-one mentoring kind of scenarios. And really, it involves the body, it involves the mind, and it involves circumstances. And so for the body, it's a case of you were saying that there's a lot of arrows in my quiver, and it makes describing it challenging. But in the body, it's really an emphasis on becoming familiar with the body. And there's all sorts of things you can do with the body, exercising for health or aesthetics, strength, for a skill set, such as a sport or something like that. But at the root of that, and of course you use your body for a living as well, but at the root of that, something that serves all of those purposes is a familiarity with the body, and an ability to feel and understand and decode the signals that the body generates, whether that's for athletics or whatever. And then with the mind, it's things like meditation and critical thinking and that sort of direction of things. And as for the circumstances, I work quite a bit in the area of dating and relationships, and quite a bit in business also. I'm lucky to have some interesting clients, some high performing clients. I would classify them as sort of high performance people. Oscar winning actors and multi-Grammy award winning musicians and directors of this and founders of that and that sort of thing. And they have pretty much been very accomplished people, but they have just the same issues that we do in the areas of relationships, of so much energy through lack of skill or lack of understanding, so much energy getting drawn into dysfunctional or difficult relationships or destructive relationship patterns and so on. So it's quite a gamut of things. I'm not sure how clear that is, but that's a little bit what I do professionally.
So yeah, it's clear to me, and I've read your bio. I know you a little bit,
yeah.
But just to even break it down more simply, you work one-on-one with clients in the capacity of a mentor, or do you ever use the word coach? I'm curious about the words that you use to describe it. Do you call coach? Do you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Coach is fine. Yeah.
Okay. And in 3 specific areas you mentioned, so the mind, the body, and circumstance. That's interesting. I like your third category, circumstance.
Yeah.
It seems like a rabbit hole you could dive into. Just the word circumstance.
Yeah, I mean it is. I mean I like to. It's a sort of an assistant. I'm an assistant to the context, really.
Got it.
So I'm a servant to the context, and in different contexts with different people, different range of those tools will be necessary. It's amazing how useful it is to be able to feel your body and feel your energy levels. I don't mean like woo-woo energy, just how you literally your mood and so on. And to feel whether you're drained or nourished by an interaction, for instance. If you can't feel from the neck down, then it's very, very difficult. So actually, a certain working with the body might provide, and often does provide, an important key to helping navigate things like a relationship or a business situation or a strategic decision you have to make in terms of your life. The body can be one of the table of advisors you have. It's not the dictator, just go completely by gut and so on. But it's good to be able to recruit. Right. Okay, what do I think I'm getting from the body, or how does my body feel about this, as well as my logic and my intellect, and my advisors inside and out.
Yeah, I mean I couldn't agree with you anymore, and that's one of the foundational steps that we practice in our Evryman groups and the whole gamut. So. Let's just we open that door. Let's go there. I would love to hear more about your use, your practices, your understanding of the body. I've recently, in the past year, after years of embodiment practice myself of different types, I started feeling a little bit sad for the mind, for my mind, and I feel like for a little bit I took sort of a detour and thought it was all about the body, but I really like what you just said about how having it be one person at the table or one of the advisors to how you make decisions. So I just want to give you free reign here, brother. Just go with this where you'd like.
Okay. Well, there's so much we could say about that, but about the advisor thing. Some people are concerned that the body is going to betray them somehow, or that to feel their bodily responses to situations and circumstances is a sort of concession to weakness.
Right.
It's soft or something like that. But actually, I know you're a hunter and so on, and I've never hunted myself, but I've certainly done lots of things outdoors and so on. And really, your body is extremely valuable in those situations. It doesn't just say no; it can say yes as well.
Well, so that's one of the most. So I just read your bio, the longer form bio of yours, and I saw the cold weather training, the cold weather survival stuff, and I have a lot of cold weather time in my life too. I have spent, hundreds of days out in deep freeze conditions, and and so I guess I'm just agreeing with you. The body, I think that sort of experience, that sort of practice, really in the most practical and fundamental way, requires a bodily connection and hearing those. So yeah, I don't know how much, but I was a wilderness therapy guide, so I led trips for teens and families forever, and that was really the first thing we practiced and learned, Steve. It was that in this context of taking care of ourselves in the wilds, regardless if it was hot and dusty in the desert or freezing sub-zero in the winter, it was that feedback loop, that communication between, how do I feel? Like, that's what we practiced. That was the basic practice. So yeah, I was really excited to see you had done that cold weather stuff.
Yes.
Was that just an interest of yours, or was that like what brought you to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interest of mine. Certainly, extreme survival kind of situations. It is an interest of mine. It is a hobby, I think, but it informs very much what I do. And I don't take people out into the Arctic, for instance, but going to the Arctic Circle can be very informative. It's very, very fascinating. I'm sure you probably know this, but I expect you've experienced this. But when I first felt that kind of cold, minus 24 Celsius in the daytime, I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, I'm afraid, for the Americans, but
it's cold.
It's really cold. It's really cold. And I first felt that it hits you like a truck. You think, whoa. And actually, I felt a little bit in my body a panic response. Panic. Because when I first felt it, of course, I was learning, I was training, so I didn't know how to handle it. I had outdoor experience in sort of more, should we say, friendlier conditions of Europe and so on. But up there, it's a different story, and it felt so tremendously oppressive and unyielding, and uninterested in negotiation. That kind of cold, you can't negotiate with that kind of cold. You can't say please, or what if I just do this, and you can't cut corners. So, and they said to us, people come here and they either love it or they hate it within a few days. You fall one way or the other, they said. And I fell in love with it. And what I learned about the cold was that it's dependable, it's reliable, it's consistent. That's something I learned about it. And if you more or less do if you handle it correctly, or handle yourself correctly, so on with your layering and your gear and your sort of approach to everything, then basically it will do what you think it will do. So that oppressive,
what, kill you?
Well, if you fuck it up, it does what you think. And I found that to be actually very, very interesting. Very, very. It becomes a certain sort of companion.
Yes.
The cold, because it just is the way it is, and that's that. And I think it's really wonderful to feel that unyielding face of nature.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I feel like so I grew up in the cold. I grew up in the northernmost part of the United States, and our winters were that deep freeze, right? We had month or 2 months of sub-zero temperatures every winter, and in that lifestyle where when you don't embrace the cold, it becomes this really kind of enemy, or it can be an enemy. You race to your car, you race inside, you bundle up.
That's right.
And then so I was 22, 23, and I started spending 3 weeks at a time out in just with no shelter, leading groups, and I think it's more of I don't think I recognized it at the time, but the amount of simple mindfulness and awareness that it brought to me was and I'd be excited to hear your opinion on this, but the ability to endure different levels of comfort, just sort of from a non-reactionary place. Well, reactionary in the way where if we started to get cold, we either had to move our bodies, we had to build a fire, so it was this sort of really fluid relationship I felt with the environment, that the cold, and I've been in ultra hot temperatures too. I've sort of run the gamut on extremes in terms of nature, but the cold is and this is, I don't know if there's anything real here, but I'm sitting here looking at you, and you have a big red beard, right? You look like a Viking. Your Instagram handle is Guru Viking. Yeah. I have Viking blood too. So, who knows? Maybe there's something
wrong with us, Dan. That's what it is.
Well, that's really cool. So it's literally something you sought out. You sought out the cold. You sought out that. Give us a little more context on you, and I know there's a lot, right? We're not going to get to it all, but you have an incredible bio. Like, where are you from? Who the hell are you, Steve?
Well, Well, I was born in Scotland.
Okay.
And I grew up in a place called the Shetland Islands.
Mm-hmm.
They are the northernmost part of the UK. You get to the sort of top of the UK mainland, British mainland, and you just keep going for quite a long time. And if you've hit Norway, you've gone too far. But that's where I grew up. And interesting place. They said the little folk story we were told as children about Shetland was it was a wedding gift. What do they call it? Dowry gift from the Scandinavian king, who I think was Danish at the time, owned it 500 years ago or so, gave it to the Scots. And as part of the wedding thing, I don't know if this is true or not, but this is what we were told. And the Scottish people cut all the trees down to make, I don't know, cabers and to toss and I don't know.
Got it.
Some sort of whiskey ingredient, who knows? But they cut them all down for whatever reason, And because of that, it's so windy up there. There were no trees to shelter the new trees, and so no trees grew back. So there are basically no trees there. Basically,
whoa.
Yeah. I mean, there are some trees, but very, very few trees, and it's hella windy, and it's very cold, and so on. And there's a lot of sheep.
So you are a Viking. You really are.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. You could say that.
Well, I mean, I'm just like kind of making up a fairy tale about you, but like, but I mean, that seems inappropriate. A treeless island in the close to the Arctic Sea.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll go with that. So I basically am a Viking, yeah. And let's see some relevant details. I grew up Catholic, actually raised in a kind of Catholic context, and my mother had this idea of a private faith or a quiet faith, she used to call it, sort of as a contrasting, say, a more demonstrable, tribal identifying kind of faith where we all get together and be the same thing together and think the same thing together and so on. So her whole sort of orientation towards that was go to the Mass, which is sort of a ritual, the ritual of the Catholic Church. It's a little bit like a church service you might get in other kind of churches, except it's always exactly the same, pretty much. They rotate the readings and so on, but it's kind of a ritual thing. Mm-hmm. And you're in this context with other people, but essentially it's about your private, personal relationship to God or the divine or stillness or the heart, or whatever it might be. So we didn't. We went to the very early morning Mass, rather than the middle of the day Mass. And the middle of the day Mass is where they get the guitars out and the tambourines, and everyone's clapping and whatever, that sort of thing. And the morning one didn't have any music at all. And I was an altar boy with my little brother, which meant that sort of from 6 or so, I was in a little outfit that looks a little bit like a cross between a bathrobe and, some sort of cheap motel dishcloth sort of thing. It was like a kind of a dress thing you basically wear. When you walk around the place, you pick up a candle from over here and you take it over there. You kneel down over there for a little while. You pick up this chalice, this cup, and you bring it to the priest. He does something with it, and then you take it away again. And it's all very choreographed and all very, very much the same thing. So, and there was no song and dance sort of music going on, and I found it to be tremendously deep experience.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Please tell me more. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we also my mother also didn't have us go to catechism, which is the kind of the little class they give you after a service for the kids to sort of tell them what to think about the religion and so on, teaching them about the religion. We didn't go to that because she said that anyone who wants to teach a catechism class probably shouldn't teach a catechism class. It's a little bit like what they say about politicians.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we didn't go to those. So it was, and I tell you what, there comes a certain point in a ritual, and this is true of, I think, of any repetitive activity of a sort, where it ceases to become you doing the ritual, you doing the thing, and it becomes the ritual in a certain sense does you.
Right.
You become kind of something kind of pops a little bit, and you become a moving part of a greater whole. You become subsumed, if you want, in this sort of collective activity.
Yeah.
And I remember, sitting there on the little pew on the side, waiting to, carry the cup or whatever it was the next thing to do. And I would just be sitting there, and it would feel like my head would just open up. The top of my head would almost open up, and there'd be this huge space, this huge stillness. Very, very deep experience that I think marked me, in a certain sense, for an orientation towards that sort of thing. And it happened to be in a religious context, which I think is probably one of the hardest places to find it. Ironically enough.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But because it was religion devoid of the tribalism, that particular, I was very lucky, that it presented that opportunity,
Brother, that would make an amazing short film, just what you just shared right there. That's a very cinematic, beautiful snapshot you just gave us. So for our guys that might be listening that maybe just sort of scratch their heads, so you said that sort of thing. You described the top of your head opened up and you felt this deep space or something. Maybe what are other examples of that sort of experience, or what's another way to talk about that might make sense to people that don't, maybe either haven't had that or have but just don't have fluency, right? That's the danger. But if we go in my biography, it might get a little strange, but you're right. I think everyone has that, actually. Everyone has that experience throughout their lives, probably many times. The sorts of experiences that I'm talking about, these sorts of altered, slightly experiences of a sort. I'll give you another example. I mean, around the same time I started martial arts training. And that was, again, same age, about 5, 6, in Wadaru karate, which is a style of karate. And the people there took it real serious, that they were training there. And in that... in karate, in most martial arts, in karate, you have something called kion, or basics. The basic movements. There's sort of this punch you always do the same way, the kick you always do the same way. And the way you train those is you go up and down the hall, doing the same punch up the hall, the same punch down the hall, and then they do with a kick, and then do with a block, so on, up and down the hall, up and down the hall. And then you combine those basics into things called kata, which are prearranged sequences of these movements, which are sort of codexes for the style. And forms is what we call them in Taekwondo. We call them forms.
Exactly, forms, exactly. So, and they have, and on the one hand, they're sort of a physical, on the surface level, a physical string of movements together. You can get deeper into the bunkai, the application, and they have sort of layers of possible application. And what looks like a block ends up being a trap, and what looks like a punch ends up being sort of a takedown or something like that. It's very interesting. But the fact is, if you do those things initially, you try to remember what goes first, this punch, then this kick. Over the years, you do it, and eventually something happens, and the form or the basic or the movement just springs out. It just occurs in a sense, and your need to consciously edit or oversee it drops. And in a certain sense, the form does you. And it's a very similar experience. Other experiences you can have is when you're out in nature, actually, just walking in nature. It doesn't have to be an extreme kind of Jungle Book scenario here. You're out in nature, and you just have that moment where things stop for a moment, and you forget yourself. Yourself, or you're filled up with the expanse of what it might be, or that it feels like your chest opens up, or sometimes you just kind of go away, and you're just in this big, wonderful context of some huge forest, because I didn't have trees growing up. I love forests, and you're in this forest. And
Same.
like,
that's interesting. Me too.
Yeah, I love it. So like the redwoods in Big Sur, for instance, one of my favorite places in the world. You go there and it's just epic, and you just disappear in a kind of a way. It's so beautiful. Yeah. And I think it can happen in times of deep connection with a human being. It can happen in very, very difficult times. Right before a car crash or a crisis of some kind. Sometimes you slow down, and then there's another kind of thing takes over. So it's accessible, I think, and people have it all the time. And I think these things are actually very natural to human beings. Mm-hmm. And I'm not of the school that's why I said it's so funny. It's so rare in a way to find it in a religious context, explicitly religious context, because actually most of the time, the real religious context or the real experiences of this sort of transcendent, experience of beauty or of these things happens far away from any prescribed tribal requirements to conform here or believe that. So.
Yeah, so two things stuck out there. A lot of things did, but the two things that rise for me. First, the word subsume. I think that's a brilliant word. What's the difference between subsume and consume? What is subsume? That's not a word I've heard in a while. What's your understanding of that word?
Well, we ought to perhaps Google it. What I think it means. To be subsumed, I think, is to be covered. I will Google it.
What do you think it means?
Well, I'll tell you that first. Yeah, I'll tell you what I meant by it anyway, and then we can see if I'm using the right word. To consume is to sort of eat something or so on, or to that sort of thing. To be subsumed by something, I think it's the equivalent of, say, being overcome by it. For instance, if you were to be in water coming in the room and it goes up past your head, you'd be subsumed by the water. You'd be kind of taken into it. So when I said you're subsumed by the ritual, I felt that feeling of being subsumed. What I meant was that, in a certain sense, you become swallowed by the ritual, and you become actually the ritual. Right. So your sense of being yourself expands, and the same thing if you're in the forest. Your sense of being yourself, it changes. You're still yourself. You're still there, but you're subsumed by this greater whole. So you're no longer just you as an individual. You become a sort of that sort of thing. What does it really mean?
Well, no, you're right on it. So the simple definition is included or absorbed into something else or in something else. So becoming a part of. Good. What a cool word. I'm gonna use that.
It's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah. So the second thing I wanted to point out too was the two examples you gave, or two examples that you gave that connected these experiences of subsumation, if that's a word, I don't know. Yeah. But involved a physical sensation. So you said when you were a kid, doing the rite in church, your head, you felt something in your head, and then you talked about being in the forest, and you said you might open your chest, you feel something opening in your chest, and I think that is a really and so for our guest here, we're talking about experiences that humans have that maybe each of us has, that's really on we're getting into some very deep, interesting but experiential, and that's what I'm trying to bring out here, the experiential part of these experiences, the actual feeling, like what it not means necessarily, but feels like to have these experiences. So I love the sort of head opening thing. Like I've experienced something like that too, and it's wild. It's wild to feel, seemingly physiologically feel those things. So and my guess is, as one who works with embodiment, this is your wheelhouse, correct?
In a sense? And I really do want to emphasize that I think it's natural. Yeah. It's not a higher order experience available to the select few. And in fact, the reason why the ritual or sports, being in the flow, maybe in a doing a prearranged form in a karate class or taekwondo class, might have that effect. Is you train so thoroughly that you get to the point where you no longer need to try, and the naturalness of just being can happen. And the same in a forest. There's something in a forest you don't need to try to experience beauty in a forest. In fact, you need to stop. So in the same way, stop trying. You need to just look outside, look at it, and then something there that evokes that. Not every single time you're in the forest. Sometimes it's raining and you've got to get firewood and you're a little bit annoyed and you wish you were at home, with a cup of tea for a British person. That's actually quite a lot of the time. Sometimes anyway. You can have that. Right. But in fact, I found outside, sometimes it juxtaposes between this, moments of just this beauty, and then there's very, very interesting polarity where you feel very, very apart from nature. Actually, you feel very almost a guest, or sometimes you feel an intruder, and depending on how well it's going, sometimes you feel unwelcome.
Totally.
In nature, you feel, whoa, you become acutely aware of your separateness from it.
Yeah.
And then other times you can become aware of the beauty, and there's a sort of oneness or whatever. It sounds a little hippie. I don't think it's that hippie, really. It's
I couldn't agree more. I love the language you use to say that too. That how natural of an experience it is. Two really visceral memories just popped up there. One was I was like a 22-year-old kid. I was out in the desert, in the wilderness, like maybe the first wilderness program I ever was part of. And, I was a seeker, I was looking, and I would read the Tao Te Ching like over and over and over. And I didn't know why, but I did. And there was something, especially like the first maybe 10 or 12 chapters or pieces in it. And I remember sitting cross-legged on the top of there's cactus all around me, and it was brown and dry and hot. And I wasn't trying to meditate. I wasn't trying to do anything, but I just got real quiet, and just like I all of a sudden got super uncomfortable, and then the discomfort sort of passed through me, and then all of a sudden it felt like I was, just on either a different planet, or I was a different person, or just something changed so immensely in that moment. And it wasn't like a truck hitting me. Mm-hmm. It was like I eased through this passageway and it opened up, and it was so cool because I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't trying to do anything. Yeah. That was a really big moment. I haven't actually thought about that for a long time. The other one I want to point out real briefly too is I began. I have so if we're talking about sort of physical and these bigger connective experiences in the woods, in the wilderness, it happens for me very regularly when it's really wet, if it's rainy and it's cold and it's uncomfortable and like all the it's not a beautiful situation. Yeah. It's actually a really sort of challenging situation, but it's almost something I can rely on. When it gets really uncomfortable, this sort of warmth and happiness starts in my torso, by my sternum and my chest, and it just spreads. And man, it's a cool thing. and it's when things are really uncomfortable a lot of times. So
I can relate to that for sure.
Yeah.
There's almost a sort of a reckless, maybe that's the Viking thing, I don't know, but there's almost this kind of reckless joy that comes with knowing that you're digging a bit deeper. It hits a certain level of your insides. It's like, okay, good. Now I get to really turn the gas up, and trudge on through, and it's I think it's wonderful. That's the sort of compressive force from the outside.
Wonderful.
Calls forth a certain force from the inside that rises to meet it. And it's a tremendous thing. Yeah.
That's beautiful, man.
That sounds like it.
And the other thing that came up a few times there was the element of either ritual, ceremony, or practice, right? The sort of the forms in martial arts and the ritual in the Catholic Church. Yeah. And I mean, do you feel like there's some pop culture things out there, like there's the 10,000 hour idea for mastery of something. Like if you practice anything for that much time, something new, you reach a new level. There's also the concept of flow states that's, so popular at times like that. And do you feel like all of that is in the same realm? I mean, is it just different ways to talk about similar things, or do you feel like there's something else going on here?
Is it in the same realm? Well, I think it's states of experience, states of being. So I think it is in the same realm. Is it directly the same thing? I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but it's very related, because sometimes the effect is tremendous action, and sometimes the effect is tremendous stillness. It seems to have quite a variable effect. These sorts of states of being. So I'm not sure. I do know certainly that I was in my teens. I was fencer, Western fencing, and I was on the Scottish fencing team there, and I do know that at the higher end of that kind of a discipline, which was as far as I took competitive sport,
Okay.
was to that level. At the high level there is a certain flow state you get into, absolutely, where you can almost anticipate your opponent's. It's like pre-verbal kind of state. You can anticipate your opponent's movements. You can affect. One of the things in fencing is cadence. So you have a certain rhythm as to how you're bouncing and moving and so on. And one of the goals is to try to draw your opponent into your cadence, so they begin to somewhat become accustomed to your rhythm and so on. And then you break the cadence, break the rhythm, and catch them flat-footed, And so all that stuff is very, very subverbal. It's very, very instinctual.
Right.
And there's something about when if you, I'll tell you, if you think anyway, if you think it's too slow, I'll tell you another really weird story. Seeing as we're being really weird.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, right, before I had my Viking beard, I used to do this thing in the morning. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but here we go. So here we go. But I used to do this thing in the morning. I'd lay in bed, and I had a television in my room. I'd lay in bed, and I'd turn the TV right down to 0, and then in the morning, with the breakfast TV or whatever, and I'd turn it up, little click by click by click, until I could just hear it like that. And I noticed when I was a kid that if I tried to understand what I was hearing, the sound or the noise of my thinking about it, decoding, translating, making associations, and so on with the language coming in, would actually drown out the sound of the TV. So I used to sit there and get it down to the point where my mind would have to go really spacious, really quiet, like that. And anyway, and I noticed that if I was thinking, I couldn't hear. But if I didn't, then I just let it wash in, the raw sensory data coming into the ears without labeling and categorizing. Then I could hear it and understand it.
Wow.
So I think that's kind of a flow state, isn't it? I don't know. These things are so fascinating.
It is so fast, so interesting. So a couple months ago, I got to do a sort of a koan initiation in the Mondo Zen tradition, and something I had never experienced before.
Jumpo Kelly, right?
Yes, exactly. And so the first practice in there has to do with a bell that gets rung, or a bowl, sort of a sound, and it's very much about what you just said. So taking in the auditory information, taking in that sound with it, like in a deeper way, in a more like non cognitive way, all just completely hearing that sound. And I've been to yoga classes with like a beautiful sort of gong at the end or something where you take in this sound just as sound. And man, so when this happened, when I did this with my friend ran me through this process, I mean, I lost it. I just like started just crying and crying and crying. It was such a unique, it was so beautiful. It just sort of like, it took me over. I was actually sitting in my little studio here with Steve, who was the first guest I had on my podcast. He's a instructor in that lineage, and but yeah, man, wow, what a well, I'm seeing things very cinematically this morning, but seeing you watching TV and playing with that, what a strange and interesting boy you were.
I think that's a compliment. I'm not sure.
No, it is. Yeah.
Well, no, I was a little bit weird. It's true. Some would argue I still am. Yeah. Well, one of my favorite ways to meditate, actually, is to sit. I live on a boat here, in the UK. I'm mostly traveling around, but when I'm at home, so to speak, I live on this canal boat, narrow boat. It's 59 foot long, 6 foot 10 wide, steel box basically. And at the front, you have this thing called a crotch, which is sort of like a balcony. It's kind of like your balcony,
Yeah.
And I sit there sometimes, in a chair or whatever, and reading book or whatever it might be, listening to the Evryman Podcast perhaps, and but sometimes I meditate out there as well, and I just sit. And one of the first things I like to do is feel, and this is something that people can try, I think, listening if they like, but I feel the sensations that reveal the presence of my body. feel the sensations.
Steve, I just lost your audio. I can't hear you now. Did something change?
Nope.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. One, two, three.
Can you hear me?
1, 2, 3. Yeah. One, two, three. One,
Yeah,
two, three.
I have nothing on your end in terms of audio now. Okay. Yeah, I see that it is. It's just I'm actually just not hearing it. I'm not hearing anything.
That's very odd, isn't it? Maybe if I mute myself and unmute.
I'm really sorry. This is
1,
very
2, 3.
annoying.
1, 2, 3. One, two, three. 1, 2, 3. Just in case you start hearing me again.
There we are.
3. Is it working now?
Now I got you.
Yeah. I just talked
I
for
had
a
you
while.
for a second when we first connected, and now it's gone again.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
There we are. There we are.
Is it me or the Skype that you can hear though?
Well, I don't know which program it's running through, but I hear you. Do you hear?
I can hear you through Skype.
Yes. Yes,
Not
that's fine.
through Zencaster.
Well, your levels are still picking up through Zencaster, so we're fine.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, it's not your fault.
Yeah. So you were just
interfering.
you were about to embark on something that I was really ready to hear. What were you gonna say?
I remember what it was.
Yeah.
How? When did I drop off? I was rambling all about being on the end of my boat and so on. When did?
So you were just about to say the actual practice, or like what you did, or
Okay.
how you meditated, what it looked like. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just start doing that, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Go for
Yeah.
it.
Well, so and I'll sit there, and well, maybe let me see. I should back it up a bit and probably say something like. And so what I like to do sometimes when I'm out there is just start by feeling the sensations that reveal the presence of my body. This is the way I sort of think about it. Feeling the sensations that reveal the presence of my body, and maybe I'll say it as if we're doing it. And I notice bottom on the chair, feet on the ground, clothing on my skin. And there's two things happening there. On the one hand, there's the raw sensory data that's flowing in. And on the other hand, there's the mind labeling and categorizing that sensory data, saying, okay, that's, ass on the chair. That's the feet on the ground. That's the clothing on my skin. And even when the mind is doing that labeling and categorizing, it's also possible to tune in to the raw sensory data. The labeling may stop or may continue. It's not so important, but it's possible to tune into the raw sensory data before it becomes labeled and categorized. And that's the same thing with sight. And I look out over the water and just look. And of course, I'm looking, and my mind says, water, bird, duck, swan, etc. But on the other hand, it's possible to just tune into even as that goes on and doesn't go on. You don't have to stop it, I don't think. I don't bother trying to stop it, but sometimes it does go away. But just look out there and just see the raw sensory data flowing in, washing in through the eyes, coming in there. And it's really becomes a full body experience of seeing without anyway. And then I do it with the hearing, hearing. And I sit there and listen, and I can hear maybe in the distance, there's a road, perhaps cars. I can hear the animals, the creaking of the boats on the ropes.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, even as the mind's labeling and categorizing those things, just tuning into the raw sound, the landscape, the sonic landscape, shifting like a sort of coming in like a sort of sonic jellyfish, coming in through the ears. All these sounds which you can parse apart and separate into their component labels. But all of those things can also be experienced as a sort of a sonic massage coming in. And what's that?
Amazing.
It's sitting on the end of my boat just listening to things, really just sort of opening my ears to this stimulus that's coming from outside. It's not I'm not levitating or anything like that, but it's just it's so wonderful. It's so wonderful. I can't remember why we were talking about that though, because when we had what were we saying again?
Well,
we had the break in the audio.
Yeah, well, we were talking about. I brought up the Junpo Kelly Zen practice that I had experienced,
right.
and we were just talking. We were talking about, I think, the raw senses in general, just sort of like bringing in.
What is the sound of one dong donging, one gong gonging? What is the sound? And the answer is, that's the answer to the Zen koan. It's an eruption of simultaneous, radical stillness and utter movement.
Right.
It's the meeting of those things, or it's just an eruption of, that's the sound of a gong in a certain way. It's,
Yeah. I want to bring this a little more into I could sit here and geek out with you about sort of a deep, intense experiences probably for a long time.
Yes.
How do you?
But for the 3 people that are still listening, you should.
When you work with your clients, when you work with people, when you share, and what we're talking about is this involved in how you teach and what you share? Or like, give us a sense of, and I know there's a lot, and maybe it's not able to just put it in one nugget, but how does this help others? I guess is a question.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Does this come up? Well, we're sharing, you and I, our personal experiences and trying to put words on these things. We're trying to F the ineffable. Yeah. And it's not. That's not what. And that's very fun to do. And it's very interesting. And I think people can certainly maybe relate to certain things. Say, I felt that. Or, oh yeah, sure. I have touched that. I have tasted that in this situation or that situation. And so often these things are limited to a religious or spiritual, explicitly religious or spiritual context. And like I said, I think that's often the most difficult place to find those things, because it requires a certain naturalness that is actually more natural than the form of a religion, say. But my whole thing is inquiry without imposition. Inquiry without imposition. That's sort of a bit of my philosophy when it comes to working with people. So I'm looking to stimulate the person into an active relationship with, let's say, the body, their mind, or their circumstances, whatever it might be. Now, I may be giving them advice about how to deal with this, really difficult relationship situation that's happening, and unreasonable partner, or very, very difficult business point of view, or something like that. It may be very, very specific in that way. But the goal behind that is to facilitate this inquiry. So my experiences are less relevant, and my frames of reference are less relevant, really. Right. So it's a kind of let's put it this way. So another little phrase I have, and this is getting a little bit closer to what I'm actually doing in a session, but what I'm doing in a session depends very much on the person, as I said. Sure. But there's no informed consent on feeling. There's no informed consent on intimacy. It's something else I say. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're engaging in some sort of bodily practice, that you're engaging in some sort of thing to investigate the feelings of what sensations is your body generating, let's say. You're going to find out, you're going to feel what's there. It's not the same thing as sort of getting yourself into a happy state or a positive state. Nothing wrong with doing that, of course. Right. It's not quite the same thing. Oftentimes, there's a sort of a background noise. I kind of compare it to going to a Kiss concert sometimes. If we go to a Kiss concert, you and me, which we should definitely do, by the way. But if we were to go to a Kiss concert and you were trying to talk to me and tell me something, I wouldn't be able to hear, perhaps, because the ambient noise level, the Kiss concert level, is just loud. Gene Simmons is doing whatever it is, and it's just super loud, so we can't hear each other. You're still talking, though, but it's underneath there. Now, you've got a couple of options.
Right.
You could shout and scream and so on. Or, let's say we went to a library where it's really quiet, and then the volume level that you're using would be very easy to hear. And in fact, it might, even in that context, be kind of loud, actually. So, when I'm working with that sort of a sensitizing momentum, which is extremely empowering because it gives you all this data information to navigate with, I'm looking at how to lower the ambient noise level, reducing the static, and so on. And then what emerges from that, as that noise level goes down and it gets quieter, what emerges from that is what was going on all the time underneath.
Beautiful.
And who knows what that's going to be. It may not be, we've been talking about these wonderful positive experiences and so on. It may not be that. It could be pain. Could be anger.
Right.
Could be frustration. Right. Could be exhaustion.
Right.
Hopelessness. These are very, very common, going on underneath there. So, in that sense, it's I mean, what do you think about that? I'm not quite sure how this relates to our personal anecdotes, but
well, no, it relates perfect. I mean, how I relate to that is I'm right there with you. Like I believe that when I work with guys one-on-one, we're doing something in a similar realm. We're with some language that I use is that I intend to be as descriptive as I can and not be prescriptive. Like we're not trying to attain a certain thing in our groups. We're not trying to be strong, healthy, positive. We're not attempting to do that. We're tuning in to the deeper subterranean stuff, allowing that to be there to express itself, to fully engage, and attempt to live from that place. And so I'm right. I guess what I'm saying is I'm right there with you. I think your Kiss concert analogy is really, really brilliant. So.
But to be super practical, say you have somebody who's really, really struggling with with their relationship with their wife or with their girlfriend, or that they would like to have a girlfriend and don't have one, something like that. And being there's a certain degree there's a certain aspect of that which is a skill development. It's necessary to develop a certain skill in relationship or in communication, or a certain understanding of interpersonal relationships, or understanding of the dating game, say, or whatever. Excuse me. That's necessary. But how do you calibrate that? Do you just absorb a system or a methodology and apply it blindly, hoping that it has a high percentage success rate? Or the better way, I think, is to calibrate your skill development in relationship to what's actually happening. And in order to feel what's actually happening, you have to be able to feel. You have to be able to feel. So it informs directly your capacity to develop whatever skill it might be. Whether it's jiu-jitsu, you're on the mat, you need to be able to feel what's going. You can't just go purely by the rote decision tree of movements that you would think and so on. It's going to be too slow. You have to add a calibration aspect. Just like when you calibrate a rifle, you shoot it and it goes left or right, and then you adjust the sights so that they become truer and truer, or more true, maybe. And then you shoot again. But you have to have that real time, in a certain sense, live feedback-based calibration of the skill. Otherwise, you become a robot. So it depends what we're working on, but certainly that's true of business. Certainly it's true of relationships. It's definitely true of the body. It's definitely true of knowing oneself. All these things. There has to be a continual openness to feeling, and by feeling I mean perceiving. I don't mean feeling as in only emotions and so on. I mean literally being able to look life in the face as it is, look the situation in the face as it is. That's the most important. And as you know, in the outdoors, one of the most important things is to be able to evaluate a situation properly. And if you're unable to look a situation in the face because of you're unable to feel the fact that you're in deep shit, then you're just going to be handicapped. You're going to be handicapped in terms of your ability to make an accurate decision. So you need to be able to have that capacity to look something in the face, warts and all, and move forward.
No, beautiful. I love that. So I think that for myself and for Evryman and for this whole project that I got going on, the redefinition of feelings as meaning the whole experience, the experience that you're having coming in. So the physical sensations and the intuitive sensation, all of these things. It's very important to me to make that distinction because you and as I'm talking to men with the quotations around it, the word feelings has a cultural stigma that is kind of turn your nose down, right? And I get it. I kind of have it myself still, but yeah, I think that's really important. And maybe the word feelings isn't even the right word, but experience or sensations but what I hear you saying is reckoning with the present, reckoning with the actual experience, what is happening. That I mean, that's at the core of what we're attempting to do with Evryman here too, and so I really appreciate the way that you described that. I know we don't have all the time in the world, and so we got a few more minutes maybe here, but I'm curious to I don't know if this is a good question. I'm gonna ask it anyway, but what is the kind of the end game when you work with a client one-on-one, or you do a retreat where with and then so what is the end game there? What is the intention sort of ultimately? Where are you headed?
Well, my intention philosophically, and then I could be more specific, is to create peers, not students. So I'm not interested in gathering students. I'm interested in creating peers. And I don't mean by peers people who are doing the same job as I'm doing necessarily.
Right.
I mean people who are who don't need me anymore, essentially. Yeah. But relate to me from a place of abundance, of a place of essentially having themselves back. And
Amazing.
sometimes I think sometimes it depends on the situation. I mean, most time if you work with someone one-on-one, it's different, but certainly in a workshop group scenario, there's a lot of projection. You're at the front, people, think, oh, okay, you must know something, and, hopefully you know something. But I think one of the roles of the teacher is to give this projections of the student back to him, piece by piece. Because often someone's looking at you and they're seeing in you actually things in themselves. They say, oh, he looks so confident. Oh, he looks so sure of himself. He looks so embodied, or whatever, whatever. He looks this, so in touch with himself, or I don't know. It depends on what kind of group it is, But really, they're seeing their aspiration. They're seeing what is inside of them, and they're not yet ready to sort of acknowledge. So it's a case of giving that back to them piece by piece. So that's my end goal, is for the person, like I said at the beginning, empowering them to think, to feel, and we've defined feel, and to make decisions for themselves. And I work very hard to make myself obsolete as much as possible. And that does two things. It of course, it's good for the student, of course, and it's good for me. We can go to more interesting places. If we keep having to change the same nappies every time, the same diapers, as you'd say, it's not so, that's not great. We want to grow up. And that means being somewhat autonomous, you could say, or getting a hold of yourself in that sort of a sense. And then it's tremendous, because then there's this peer situation going on, And you'd think that people, when they get that, they wouldn't want to come back, or they just go off and conquer the world and do all that. But actually, in a situation when there's no ceiling, even a glass ceiling, and in a situation where my level isn't the limit, it's not the upper limit, there's no reason to go anywhere. There's actually no reason to end that kind of a relationship, because it can morph and change and become very rich. And it's one of my great pleasures to see people I work with exceed me and surpass me in the things that they initially come to me for. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
That's what I aim for.
That's beautiful. What about just you as Steve, the individual, in the context of your life? Like, where are you headed? What are your aspirations or dreams at this point in life? And this is how old are you?
31.
Steve? Okay. Wow. Amazing. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. You're as old as my brother. Actually, my little brother has a big red beard just like that.
Is he?
You guys are different human beings, obviously, but yeah.
Or are we?
Yeah. So where the heck are you going from here, man?
Well,
Is it even a valid or necessary question? And maybe it's not. I don't know.
It's a very good question. I'm just trying to sort of ponder in what way to answer it. I have certain things that I'm, doing professionally and so on, and that have certain goals and so on. But I think personally, I'm just attempting. How to say it? I'm trying to kind of have some pithy answer in a way that summarizes the whole thing. But I'm just attempting to be. Well, actually, you know what? I know exactly what it is. But I'd like to be a force for good. That's wonderful. The phrase that I work with personally. This is sort of personal, so I'm not. This isn't kind of something necessarily you'll hear me talk about in a teaching situation, because I'm still kind of working on it. Force for good, and there's two parts to that: force and good. And I'm not sure if it's the best phrase, but it's kind of what I work with a little bit in my own explorations. Currently, one of my explorations that requires two things: it requires force, power, and it requires a certain orientation to the good. And we can look into those things. But to me, good means has a connotation of service, of being a kind of assistant to the context, to being that's a midwife for individuation, or whatever you want to say. And that thankfully doesn't depend on my being some swell fella, because actually it often depends on getting out of the way of someone's natural intelligence, to be honest with you. Which I find quite relieving, because I'm not always convinced about that I'm a swell fella every single day, But the force part is very interesting. You can be a very good person, very nice person, and very loving and serving kind of person, but without the force. And a lot of times, I see that, and there's a tepidness to it. There's a passivity to that positive orientation towards life. There's a kind and that I don't like that. I'd like to combine the good with this power, with a force, so that you actually have the capacity to add life to a situation, as opposed to just floating down the stream of positive thinking and passive things and these are my goals, and you're living in a fantasy land. You're living this kind of idea of yourself in 10 years time, or you're living in your past. Oh, this happened to me, that happened to me. I'm interested in being here now and a force for good, and that involves things like, where do I leak energy, where where am I compromising, those sorts of things. And it's not to become the best version of myself. I'm utterly uninterested in that, to be honest with you. That I think is a shallow motivation. It doesn't drive me to become the best version of myself. But who cares, about that? Why? Why do all that? Well, I tell you why. To participate in life. That's why. I want to be a participant in life. Of life. To press my lips against life. That's what I'm interested in doing, and the more power you can kind of bring to that, the more life you can work with, the better. So it's that subsuming, in a way. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think I really that hits home for me too, brother. Like that, I think that it's hard to put words to it, but I have at different points in my life just how deeply and passionately I love being alive. Sort of, I love this experience of being, and I'm glad that you brought up the force and sort of the power aspect there too. And I feel like that's something that I've really been stepping into in the last, I guess a process here and there with spurts and fits and everything, but. I really appreciate that. I really do, and I also appreciate the not being interested in being the best version of yourself. I think that's as we build every. Right. But it's interesting. It seems like an easy thing to say too, right? Or
well, at some point there has to be a reason for it, and to become a good version of yourself, so you can be a good version of yourself, is a sort of pointless endeavor in a way. It's the usefulness of yourself that is to me anyway. We're talking personally now, and our individual ideas here, but to me it's the usefulness, the participation, and participation means to walk in life with life and death, with the up and down, with the limits as well as the possibilities, with the restrictions and the failures as well as the successes and so on, and to be a contributing factor to the betterment of, or to the richness of life, as opposed to a kind of a sort of a parasitical person who's essentially strip mining life to improve themselves. Life is just all about learning so I can become the best person, and so on. It's a sort of quite a narcissistic point of view, I think.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah.
So and that participation is very key. We didn't go into some later events, which perhaps another time. But for in my teens, I was an apprentice to a Christian mystic for a few years, right? And that's the whole thing there. That is, it's not really very much about Christianity, really. It's in a certain sense, it's about that participation. It's about, and Jesus is sort of the model there in a way, where that's God incarnating as man to participate. And it didn't go all that well for him all the time,
No,
it was pretty hard a lot of the time. And that's what happens when you participate. But that's what happens when you're involved in life, as opposed to trying to become so strong and increase your square footage so much that life can't touch you. You become, the master of your surroundings. Well, that lasts for a certain amount of time, but the surroundings are bigger than you. The rug gets pulled.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful, brother. That feels like a pithy ending there. That feels wonderful.
We went some weird places, man.
No, we really did, and we may have to a little bit down the road do this again, because there's so much more that I'd like to hear from you too. But I want to make a connection here between our listeners and your practical work. I don't want to say practical, but your work in the world. Your sort of offering, your participation in how you're giving back, your retreats and your. I know you have a movement method that you have available. What would you like to sort of put on the table for guys at this point?
Well, if any of this made any sense, is interesting at all, then they could go to my website. Is that what you mean, that sort of thing?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, my website is guruviking.com, www.guruviking.com, and there, there's a lot of free audio, and there's a link to a SoundCloud account that has lots of talks and musings and so on there, and there you can also find and that's all free. There's also articles and so on that are free, and you can find the movement method there, the movement koan method, which is a kind of mixture of joint nourishing movement and body-based mindfulness and neuroplasticity things, limb independence, a lot of interesting stuff. You can find that on there as well if you're interested in going that route. And there you'll also find details of the events that I'm doing. A lot of stuff for men, a lot of stuff for men and women, all kind of weird and wonderful things. But that's the place to find out. And you can also read this about this bio that we've been talking about. Find out what's in there.
So usually I probably should have started with some of this, but two things. So I came into contact with you, Steve, through a close friend of mine, a new close friend of mine, Jordan Reasoner, who's been on the podcast himself.
Yeah.
And he described you as an incredibly wise friend or dude, just sort of this and that really struck a chord in me.
That's nice.
And the other sort of connection is I've done a workshop and done some work with Michaela Boehm, who I know you teach with and you do work with in the past, I feel very. I just want to share that I feel very. Very warm towards you. I feel very grateful that you came on and shared. I feel sort of like this desire to explore more with you. I think there's a lot of. It was very fun and weird and sort of opening to talk to you today and.
It was so much fun. I really enjoyed it, Dan. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. Great podcast, man. I love it.
Thank you, brother. All right, well, we'll do this again someday.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, man. Take care. All right, guys. Thanks for listening to this episode. Check out Steve and his work at guruviking.com. Go to our website, everyman.co. Look at what we got going on. We are in the midst of planning some more expeditions for next year. And we are getting ready for this next retreat in December. 30 guys, show up, change your life, be more yourself.